In this talk, we will learn about the nutritional and oxygen requirements of different bacteria. It is estimated that life began on Earth around 3.5 to 4 billions of years ago. The first living organisms that evolved were the prokaryotes. Pro means before, while karyon means nucleus. Thus, prokaryotes are organisms that were present before a nucleus evolved. All prokaryotes are single-cell organisms, and they can be grouped into the domain of either bacteria or archaea. All prokaryotes do not have any membrane-bound organelles, and thus their cellular composition is much more simpler than eukaryotes. Eukaryotes have many different types of membrane-bound organelles that are present inside the cell. All prokaryotes can be grouped into one of two kingdoms. The kingdom of eubacteria comes under the domain of bacteria, while we also have eukaryotes in the kingdom of archaebacteria, which comes under the domain of archaea. Organisms that are present in the kingdom of archaebacteria are thought to have been the ancestors of eukaryotes. All bacteria are single-cell prokaryotes. They are quite small and hence are also called as microorganisms. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes despite being microbes. They are abundantly present in all kinds of environments, including those that are very harsh. Hence, they have major impacts on all multicellular organisms. They play important roles on their health and well-being. Despite being small, the bacterial cell has many different features. Some bacteria have an outer covering called as a glycocalyx or a capsule. Many bacteria have a cell wall, which usually has peptidoglycan as one of its components. All bacteria have a cell membrane or a plasma membrane, which is a phospholipid bilayer. Bacteria have a nucleoid, which consists of their chromosomal DNA. Some bacteria can have extra chromosomal DNA called as plasmids, which are not required for their survival. Some bacteria have flagella or a single flagellum that they use for motility purposes. Some bacteria have fimbriae or pili that are usually made up of adhesins that allow attachment. Like every other living organism, bacteria have nutritional needs. All living organisms need an energy source that they can use in order to synthesize ATP. Depending on the source of energy, organisms can be chemotrophs, where they oxidize chemical molecules to obtain energy, or they can be phototrophs, where they obtain energy from light. All organisms also need a carbon source. This carbon source will provide the raw material in order to build different metabolites and molecules that the cells need for their survival and growth. Depending on the carbon source, we can have organisms that are autotrophs, which use inorganic carbon sources like carbon dioxide in order to make other carbon compounds. On the other hand, heterotrophs are those molecules that use organic molecules as the carbon source to make other carbon compounds present in the cell. All organisms also need an electron source that they can then use in order to drive different types of processes essential for cell survival. The electron source can be either an organic compound or it can be inorganic molecules. Thus, taking into account the energy source, the electron donor, as well as the carbon source, we can have different types of organisms like photoorganoheterotrophs, photolidoheterotrophs, or chemoorganoheterotrophs, so on and so forth. Let's have a look at some of these. A photolithoautotroph is an organism that's able to obtain energy from light and hence photo. obtains electrons from inorganic compounds, hence litho, and is able to make their own organic carbon molecules from carbon dioxide, and hence autotrophs. Examples of such bacteria are cyanobacteria, which are considered to be the oldest organisms that are capable of performing photosynthesis. Chemolithoautotrophic bacteria, on the other hand, are those that obtain energy from oxidizing inorganic compounds. They obtain electrons from inorganic compounds, hence, they are both chemo and litho, and they use carbon dioxide as their carbon source. Examples of such bacteria are sulfur or iron oxidizing bacteria, as well as nitrifying bacteria. Chemolithoheterotrophic bacteria are those that are able to obtain energy from oxidizing inorganic molecules. They also obtain electrons from inorganic molecules, but use organic molecules as a carbon source. Examples of such bacteria are some sulfur oxidizing bacteria. But it should be noted that it's not very common to find chemolithoheterotrophic bacteria. On the other hand, chemoorganoheterotrophic bacteria are quite common. They obtain their energy from oxidizing organic compounds, and they also get their electrons from organic molecules. They use organic molecules as carbon sources as well, and some popular examples are Escherichia coli and Staphylococcus aureus. But please know that there are many, many more chemoorganoheterotrophic bacteria. The way bacteria can have different nutritional requirements, they can also have different oxygen requirements. Obligate aerobes are those bacteria that require oxygen for cellular respiration. Thus, when we look at the growth of these bacteria in a tube, they tend to grow towards the surface where there is more oxygen gas present. Facultative anaerobes, on the other hand, are those bacteria that can use oxygen if it is present, but if there is no oxygen, they can still survive by performing fermentation processes or anaerobic respiration. When we look at their growth, then usually we see more growth towards the top of the tube where there is more oxygen, but we also see growth towards the other parts of the tube as well. Obligate anaerobes, on the other hand, are those organisms that use substances other than oxygen for generating energy and hence perform anaerobic respiration. When we look at the growth of these organisms in a tube, we can see that they usually will grow at the bottom of the tube where we have the least concentration of oxygen. In these organisms, oxygen is actually quite toxic, and hence they employ fermentation processes in order to generate energy. Aerotolerant anaerobes are those that do not use oxygen for respiration or growth purposes, but tolerate its presence. And hence, when we grow them in tubes, we can see that they grow throughout the tube. Microaerophiles, on the other hand, are those bacteria that require low concentrations of oxygen for growth. And hence, they do need oxygen. However, they need lower concentrations, so their growth is limited towards the middle parts of the tube. Bacteria can impact many different living organisms. They play important roles in the environment. For example, they have nitrogen fixation capabilities, where they take nitrogen from the air and convert it into nitrogenous compounds that can be taken up by other living organisms, like plants. They play important roles in recycling nutrients and breaking down dead and decaying matter. In the food industry, they are very commonly used to make fermented foods like yogurt and kimchi, but they can also be used to make other products like biodegradable plastic. They were also used to make acetone, which was an important part of explosives during World War II. Bacteria have a significant impact on health. They form the microbiome, which helps different organisms to remain healthy, but at the same time, Some microorganisms can also cause infections, which result in a lot of misery in the organisms that are infected by these bacteria. With this, we come to the end of our talk where we learned about different aspects of the bacterial cell. We also learned about nutritional needs of bacteria that included the sources of energy, electrons, and carbon. We also learned that different bacteria can have different oxygen requirements. And finally, we saw the impact of bacteria on different living systems.